What if the only thing standing between you and the life you want is not talent, not luck, not even time, but the decision to keep going when everything inside you is screaming to stop? What if success was never meant to find you, but was always waiting to surrender to you the moment you refused to quit? Think about a bamboo tree. You plant it, you water it every single day. For 4 years, nothing. No growth, no sign. Just dirt, just silence. Most people would walk away. They would call it a failure. But the person who stays, who keeps watering that invisible seed, on the 5th year, that bamboo shoots up 90 feet in 6 weeks. 90 feet in 6 weeks. The growth was never missing. It was just happening underground where no one could see it. Welcome to Wisdom Woven, the place where ancient Buddhist wisdom meets the life you are actually living right now. If this is your first time here, you are exactly where you need to be. If this video speaks to something deep inside you, do us a small favor. Like this video, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs to hear this today, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Now, let us begin. There is a monk, no famous name, no viral quote attached to him, who lived in a small monastery in the mountains of Tibet. Every morning, before the sun came up, before anyone else stirred, this monk would sit alone and do one thing. He would write. Not prayers, not philosophy, just observations about what he saw around him. Leaves, rain, people passing through the valley. He did this every single day for over 30 years. When he died, they found thousands of pages. Students came from across the world to read what he had written. And the first thing every single one of them said was the same thing. They said, this man understood something about life that we have been missing our whole lives. His secret was not brilliance. His secret was not divine inspiration. His secret was simply this: he never stopped. Buddhism does not teach success the way the modern world sells it. It does not promise shortcuts. It does not hand you a checklist. What Buddhism hands you is far more uncomfortable and far more powerful than that. It hands you a mirror. It asks you to look clearly at where you are placing your energy, your attention, your days. The Buddha once said something that most motivational speakers never quote because it is too quiet to sell. He said, drop by drop, a water pot is filled. Not wave by wave, not flood by flood, drop by drop. That sentence alone is worth more than most self-help books ever written, because it tells you exactly how growth works. It is slow, it is steady, and it is absolutely unstoppable. Here's the uncomfortable truth that almost no one talks about. Most people do not fail because they lack ability. They fail because they are measuring the wrong thing. They measure results when they should be measuring effort. They measure how far they are from the destination when they should be measuring how much more consistent they are becoming. They are watching the bamboo above the ground and completely ignoring the roots forming beneath it. The word in Buddhism for this kind of disciplined, patient, daily effort is virya. It translates loosely to energy or effort, but not the frantic kind, not the desperate kind. Virya is the kind of effort that a river has, calm on the surface, absolutely relentless underneath, and given enough time, it carves through solid rock. Now, here is where it gets interesting. Modern science actually backs this up. Neuroscientists have found that the human brain physically rewires itself with repeated behavior. Every time a person practices something consistently, whether it's a skill, a discipline, or even a way of thinking, the brain builds stronger and stronger neural pathways for it. The Buddhist monks knew this thousands of years before any brain scanner ever existed. They just called it something different. They called it practice. Growth that cannot be seen is still growth. This is perhaps the hardest thing for a generation raised on instant notifications and overnight success stories to truly believe. But the person who wakes up quietly every day and works on themselves, who reads, who reflects, who improves by 1%, that person is becoming someone that success will not be able to ignore. There was a student who once approached a Zen master, frustrated. He said, "Master, I have been practicing for 2 years and I see no change in myself." The master looked at him and asked, "When a fire is burning inside a pot, can you see it from the outside?" The student said no. The master nodded and said, "But the water is boiling." That is the nature of real growth. It is boiling long before it overflows. And the tragedy of most human lives is not that they never had potential. The tragedy is that they walked away from the pot just before the water reached its breaking point.
This video is not about telling you to hustle harder. That message is everywhere, and honestly, it is exhausting. This is about something quieter and something far more dangerous to mediocrity. This is about the kind of focus that does not announce itself, the kind of growth that does not post about itself, the kind of dedication that simply keeps moving. Buddhism teaches something called the Noble Eightfold Path. Most people hear that and immediately picture monks in robes chanting in a language they do not understand. But strip away the ritual, and what you are left with is a 2,500-year-old operating system for becoming the best version of yourself. And right at the center of that system is right effort, the commitment to keep going without craving the applause. Here is what no algorithm will tell you. The people who eventually achieve what looks like overnight success to everyone watching, those people were watering bamboo for years. The musician who blew up last year was playing to empty rooms for a decade. The entrepreneur who raised millions had 100 rejections filed in a drawer somewhere. The version of them that the world sees is year 5. What the world missed was years 1 through 4 underground. The ancient Buddhist text called the Dhammapada opens with a line that hits different when you really sit with it. It says, "Mind is the forerunner of all actions. Everything begins in the mind." Which means before your life changes on the outside, it has to change on the inside first. The growth starts in a place no one can see, no one can measure, and no one can take credit for except you. So the question this video is going to spend time with is this: how do you grow when you cannot see the growth? How do you stay consistent when the results are invisible? How do you keep watering a bamboo tree when everyone around you has given up on their seeds and moved on? That is exactly what the next parts of this journey are going to answer, one uncomfortable, honest Buddhist truth at a time. Because the seed that refuses to stop growing does not need perfect conditions. It does not need applause. It doesn't even need sunlight at first. It just needs one thing: someone stubborn enough to keep watering it. And before we move forward, drop one word in the comments below. Just one word that describes where you are right now in your growth journey. One word, that's all. Because when you name where you are, you give yourself permission to move forward from it. And when this video fills with those words from people all around the world, something powerful happens. A community forms around people who refuse to quit. And that is exactly the kind of energy this channel was built for. The Buddhist art of showing up every single day. Nobody talks about the day before the breakthrough. They talk about the breakthrough. They take pictures of the breakthrough. They make documentaries about the breakthrough. But the day before, the ordinary, unremarkable, slightly boring day before, that day gets no credit. And that day is actually the most important day of all. There's a reason that Buddhism has survived for over 2,500 years, while empires, ideologies, and entire civilizations have crumbled around it. It's not because Buddhism is mysterious or magical. It's because Buddhism figured out something about human beings that most systems completely ignore. It figured out that the way a person spends their ordinary days is the way they spend their entire life. Somewhere in Japan, there's a tradition called Kaizen. The word itself is simple. Kai means change, Zen means good. Together, it means continuous, small, daily improvement. This practice was not invented in a boardroom or a business school. It was inspired directly from Buddhist philosophy, and it is the reason Japan rebuilt itself into one of the most precise, disciplined, and innovative nations on earth after complete destruction, not through one massive effort, through showing up every single day. Most people live their life in two modes. They're either fully on fire, motivated, excited, journaling at midnight, ready to change everything, or they're completely collapsed, tired, distracted, convincing themselves they'll start again on Monday.
Buddhism would look at both of those states and say the same thing. Neither of these is the path. The path is what happens in between.
There was a young student who traveled a great distance to study under a well-known Buddhist teacher. When he arrived, he expected deep meditation sessions and profound conversations about existence. Instead, the teacher handed him a broom and said, "Start by sweeping the courtyard." The student swept. The next morning, same thing. He swept again. This went on for weeks. One day, frustrated, he asked, "When do the real lessons begin?" The teacher looked at him and said quietly, "They began on the first day." That story is not about humility. It is about something deeper. It is about the fact that showing up for the small, unsexy, repetitive task is itself the practice. The courtyard was not just a courtyard, it was a mirror. And every day the student swept it, he was building something inside himself that no lecture could have built for him. The Buddhist concept of sila, which roughly translates to ethical conduct and daily discipline, is not just about being a good person. It is about creating a rhythm of life that is so consistent, so rooted, that it becomes unshakable. Sila is essentially your daily architecture, the things you do automatically, without negotiation, without debate with yourself. Those daily non-negotiables are what shape a person over time far more than any single decision ever will. Here is something worth thinking about. A person who meditates for 1 hour once a month is not a meditator. A person who meditates for 10 minutes every single morning, that person is a meditator. The frequency is not just more important than the duration. The frequency is almost everything. Because frequency builds identity, and identity drives behavior in ways that motivation simply cannot sustain. Think about a stone path through a forest. The first time someone walks it, they have to push through the overgrowth. The second time, slightly easier. The 10th time, there is a visible trail. The 100th time, the path is clear, wide, effortless. The walker did not change the forest through one dramatic act. They changed it by returning again and again and again. Growth works exactly the same way inside a human being. There's a particular story in Buddhist tradition about a monk named Milarepa. He is one of the most celebrated figures in Tibetan Buddhism, not because he was born wise, not because he had a divine gift handed to him, but because of what he did in the ordinary hours of his ordinary days for years on end. He meditated in caves, in cold, in silence, with nothing. And slowly, painfully, without any audience, he became someone whose words are still being read 1,000 years later. The world remembered him not for one great moment, but for 10,000 small ones. This is the part that the success industry desperately does not want to tell people, because it cannot sell patience. It cannot package consistency into a weekend course. It cannot put a price tag on showing up quietly every morning and doing the work before anyone is watching. But that unglamorous, unsponsored, unposted daily practice, that is where everything real is built. A researcher once studied the practice habits of elite performers across different fields: musicians, athletes, chess players, surgeons. What he found was not that these people had more talent. What he found was that they had logged more hours of what he called deliberate practice, focused, intentional, daily repetition. The Buddhist monks had no research paper to cite, but they had been living this truth since before the concept of performance research even existed. Buddhism teaches that every day is itself a complete life. The morning is a birth, the evening is a death, and what happens in between is entirely up to the person living it. This is not poetic decoration. This is a practical instruction. It means do not wait for the right week or the right season or the right circumstances. The only canvas you are ever handed is today, and what you paint on it is entirely your choice. Here is the quiet irony of showing up every day.
When a person first starts, the progress feels invisible. The effort feels disproportionate to the results. And for most people, that gap between effort and visible result is where the whole thing collapses. They stop. They assume they were wrong about themselves. But the person who understands Buddhist philosophy knows that this gap is not a sign that nothing is working. This gap is actually where the most important work is happening. The word the Buddha used for this phase, the invisible phase, translates loosely as the ripening, like fruit on a tree that is not yet visible from the outside. The ripening is not dramatic, it does not announce itself, but cut the fruit open at the wrong time and it is bitter. Let it ripen fully and it is exactly what it was always meant to be. People spend enormous amounts of energy trying to find the perfect system, the perfect morning routine, the perfect productivity method, the perfect strategy. And there is nothing wrong with structure. But Buddhism would gently point out that the best system in the world is useless without the one ingredient no system can provide: showing up to use it. Every day, even on the days when it feels like nothing is moving. There is a teaching that says, do not judge the day by the harvest, judge it by the seeds planted. This single shift in measurement changes everything. Because on any given day, a person who plants a seed has done something significant, even if the ground above looks completely bare. The Buddhist art of showing up is really the art of measuring by seeds, not by harvest. And that reframe alone has the power to change how a person moves through their life. One of the most underrated qualities that Buddhism celebrates is something called steadiness. Not excitement, not inspiration, steadiness. The ability to bring the same quality of effort to Tuesday morning that you brought to the first day. Because excitement shows up for everything. Inspiration shows up occasionally. But steadiness, quiet, humble, reliable steadiness, that is what separates the person who makes it from the person who almost made it. And here's what becomes remarkable over time. The person who shows up every day without demanding a reward, without demanding applause, without demanding a result, eventually becomes someone who does not need external conditions to function. Their practice is no longer dependent on motivation. Their growth is no longer tied to whether someone is watching. They have become, in the truest Buddhist sense, self-sustaining, like a fire that has learned to feed itself. So the question worth sitting with is this: what would your life look like 5 years from now if you simply showed up every single day and did the thing you know you need to do? Without negotiating with yourself, without waiting for the perfect moment, without needing the result to be visible before you believed in the process. That answer is not somewhere out in the future. That answer is already forming, right now, in what you choose to do today. Silence your ego. Sharpen your focus. There is a particular kind of person who works incredibly hard and still gets nowhere. They read the books, they set the goals, they post about the journey. They have the vocabulary of someone who is growing. But underneath all of that activity, underneath the productivity and the planning and the perfectly organized notes, there is something quietly sabotaging everything. And that something has a name. It is the ego. And it is the most polite, most convincing, most well-dressed enemy a person will ever face. The ego does not come at you loudly. It does not walk in and announce itself. It whispers. It says things like, "You are not being recognized enough for what you do." It says, "Why is that person ahead of you when you are clearly more capable?" It says, "Maybe you should switch directions. Try something new, because this path is taking too long and people are not noticing." The ego speaks in the language of reason, and that is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Picture a lake on a perfectly still morning. The water is so calm you can see the bottom. Every stone, every fish, every detail visible. Now throw a handful of rocks into that lake. Suddenly, nothing is clear. The surface is disturbed. The depth disappears. The ego are those rocks, and stillness is the return only after you stop throwing them. Buddhism has a term for the ego-driven mind. It is called the monkey mind, gappicita. A a mind that jumps from branch to branch, never landing, never settling, always reaching for the next thing before fully grasping what it already has. The Buddha did not describe this as a character flaw. He described it as the default human condition, which means struggling with ego is not weakness, but staying stuck in it without awareness, that is the choice. Here is something that almost never gets said honestly. A large percentage of what people call ambition is actually ego in disguise. Real ambition is quiet. It is directional. It knows where it is going and it moves there without needing commentary. Ego-driven ambition, on the other hand, is noisy. It needs validation. It needs comparison. It needs to know where it stands relative to everyone else at all times. And that constant comparison is one of the most focus-destroying forces a person can carry inside them. There was a young archer in ancient Japan who was considered the most talented student his teacher had ever seen. His technique was perfect, his aim was extraordinary, but he kept losing competitions. His teacher watched him for a long time and finally said, "Your arrows are not missing the target, your thoughts are." The student was so focused on beating the others that he had completely lost connection to the shot itself. His ego had walked onto the field and picked up his bow without him realizing it. Buddhism teaches something called anatta, the concept of non-self. Now, this sounds philosophical and slightly uncomfortable to most people, but in practical terms, anatta simply means this: the version of you that needs applause, that needs to be seen, that needs to be better than others, that version is not actually you. That is a construction, a story you inherited and began to believe. The real self, the one underneath all that noise, does not need any of that. And when a person begins to operate from that deeper place, their focus becomes something almost supernatural.
Focus is not a technique. This is where most productivity advice gets it completely wrong. People are sold focus as a system. Block your time, silence your phone, use the right app. And while those things are not useless, they are surface level. Real focus is a state of being. It is what remains when the ego has been quieted enough that a person can give their full, undivided attention to what is directly in front of them. The Buddhist word for this is samadhi, a state of deep, concentrated presence, and it cannot be downloaded, it has to be cultivated. Here is the uncomfortable math of ego versus focus. Every moment a person spends comparing themselves to someone else is a moment stolen from their own path. Every hour spent performing growth on social media instead of actually practicing it is an hour that compounds against them over time. The ego always presents itself as useful, as motivation, as standards, as drive. But follow it long enough and it leads a person into a life that looks impressive from the outside and feels completely hollow on the inside. There was a Zen master who was asked by a student, "What is the secret to achieving great things?" The master picked up the student's cup and began pouring tea into it. He kept pouring even as the cup overflowed and tea spilled across the table. The student said, "Stop, the cup is full, no more will go in." The master set down the teapot and said, "You are like this cup, full of your own opinions, your own ego, your own ideas about how things should go. How can anything new enter? The secret is not filling. The secret is emptying." That emptying, that deliberate quieting of the self-centered noise is not passivity. It is not weakness. It is actually one of the most aggressive acts of self-development a person can commit, because it requires a level of honesty that the ego will fight with every tool it has. The ego will call emptying yourself giving up. It will call humility losing. It will call focus boring. It will call silence useless. Every single label the ego puts on stillness is a lie designed to keep itself alive. The Buddha spent 6 years in extreme ascetic practice before his enlightenment. He starved himself. He pushed his body to its absolute limit. And what he found was not clarity, but more noise, more suffering, more ego dressed up as spiritual achievement. It was only when he sat under the Bodhi tree and simply became still, without forcing, without striving, without performing, that everything opened. The ego had finally exhausted itself, and in that exhaustion, focus was born. There is a modern parallel to this that is almost funny if it were not so accurate. People exhaust themselves chasing success with the ego leading the way. They hustle, they grind, they perform, they compare, they collapse, they start again. And in rare, quiet moments, usually at 2 in the morning when the noise finally stops, they catch a glimpse of who they actually are underneath all of that. And in that glimpse, they feel more capable, more clear, and more directed than they have felt in months. That 2 in the morning clarity is not an accident. That is what focus feels like when the ego is finally too tired to interfere. Buddhism does not ask a person to destroy the ego. That is actually a misunderstanding that causes more suffering than it solves. Buddhism asks a person to see the ego clearly, to recognize when it is speaking, to notice its tactics, and to gently, without drama, choose not to follow it in that moment. Not forever, just in that moment, and then in the next one, and then in the one after that. This is the actual practice, not some dramatic spiritual war, just a series of small, quiet choices. When a person learns to operate with a quieter ego, something remarkable happens to their work. They stop doing things to be seen and start doing things because they are worth doing. They stop measuring themselves against others and start measuring themselves against who they were yesterday. They stop needing the result to validate the effort. And in that shift, their energy, which was previously scattered across comparison and performance and anxiety, suddenly concentrates like sunlight through a lens, and concentrated sunlight can start a fire. The reason most people never reach their potential is not a lack of capability, it is a lack of concentrated effort over time. And the reason effort never concentrates is because the ego keeps diffusing it, spreading it thin across too many directions, too many distractions, too many performances. The person who learns to silence that diffusion, even partially, even imperfectly, immediately operates at a level that most people around them cannot understand or explain.
There is a beautiful line from the Zen tradition that says, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The tasks do not change. The outer life may look identical. What changes is the quality of presence brought to those tasks. The ego wants enlightenment to look dramatic, to look like arrival, but real focus, real growth, often looks exactly like what it looked like before. Just quieter, just cleaner, just fully there. A person who chops wood with their whole attention is doing something profoundly different from a person who chops wood while mentally rehearsing arguments, comparing themselves to others, and calculating how this effort will eventually be recognized. The wood splits the same way, but only one of those people is actually growing. Only one of those people is building something that lasts. Here is the real edge that Buddhist philosophy gives to anyone serious about their growth. Most people are fighting their circumstances. Buddhism teaches, fight nothing. Observe everything, including yourself, especially the part of yourself that performs, that competes, that needs to win in ways that have nothing to do with actual progress. Observe that part with honesty and without judgment, because the moment you can see the ego clearly, it loses its grip. And the moment it loses its grip, your focus returns, sharp, clean, entirely yours. And so the question worth carrying forward is not, how do I become more motivated? That is the ego's question. The real question, the Buddhist question, is simply this: what would be possible if every ounce of energy currently being spent on comparison, performance, and validation was redirected entirely toward the one thing that actually matters? What could a person become? What could anyone become if they simply stopped dividing themselves and started concentrating? The answer to that question is not somewhere in the future. It is waiting, quietly, on the other side of a quieted ego. The middle path to unstoppable progress. There is a trap that almost every serious person falls into at least once, usually more than once. It is the trap of extremes. The person who decides to change their life and immediately wakes up at 4 in the morning, cuts out every comfort, works 16 hours a day, and burns so completely and so violently that within 3 weeks they are collapsed on their couch, unable to do anything at all. They call this failure a lack of discipline, but it was never a discipline problem, it was a direction problem. They swung the pendulum so far in one direction that the other extreme became inevitable. The world loves extremes, extreme diets, extreme hustle, extreme sacrifice, extreme rest. Every few months, a new extreme gets packaged and sold as the answer, and people buy it not because they are foolish, but because extremes feel like commitment. They feel like seriousness. They feel like finally doing what it takes. But what they actually produce, more often than not, is burnout dressed up as dedication. And burnout does not discriminate. It takes down talented people just as efficiently as it takes down everyone else. Imagine a man walking across a desert. He has two choices. He can sprint, push as hard as his body allows, cover ground fast, feel the rush of speed, or he can crawl, move so slowly and so carefully that the desert itself seems to swallow him. Neither gets him across. What gets him across is the pace that is sustainable, the pace that does not destroy him before he arrives. Progress has always worked this way. It just rarely gets talked about because sustainable pacing does not make for exciting content. The Buddha understood this problem deeply and personally. Before his enlightenment, he tried both paths with full commitment. He lived as a prince in complete luxury, every comfort, every pleasure, every indulgence. And then he left all of it and practiced extreme asceticism for years, near starvation, physical punishment, relentless self-denial. He gave both paths everything he had, and both paths failed him completely. What emerged from that failure was one of the most quietly radical ideas in human history. He called it the middle path, Mashima Patipada, and it changed everything. The middle path is not compromise. This is the most common misunderstanding about it, and it needs to be addressed directly. Compromise suggests giving up something on both sides and settling for less. The middle path is not settling. It is precision. It is finding the exact point of effort that is neither too tight nor too loose, like the string of an instrument tuned perfectly. Too tight and it snaps, too loose and it produces no sound. The middle path is the tension that creates music.
There is a story of a musician who came to the Buddha struggling with meditation. He said, "I cannot find the right level of effort. When I try too hard, my mind tightens and I cannot concentrate. When I relax too much, I fall asleep." The Buddha asked him, "When you tune your instrument before a performance, what do you look for?" The musician said, "I look for the string that is neither too tight nor too loose." The Buddha smiled and said, "Do exactly that with your mind." That conversation happened 2,500 years ago. It has never stopped being relevant. Here is what the middle path actually looks like in the context of growth and success. It is the person who works with deep focus for meaningful hours, not frantic, not performative, but genuinely concentrated, and then rests without guilt, fully, without one eye still on the work. It is the person who pushes their edge without crossing into destruction, who challenges themselves without punishing themselves, who holds high standards without turning those standards into weapons pointed inward. This sounds simple. It is genuinely one of the hardest things a human being can learn to do. Buddhism introduces a concept called right effort, sama vayama, as one of the 8 elements of the Noble Eightfold Path. Right effort does not mean maximum effort. It does not mean relentless effort. It means appropriate effort, calibrated effort, the effort that matches the task, the season, and the person applying it. A farmer does not water their crops the same way in every season. They read the conditions and they respond accordingly. Right effort is that same intelligence applied to a human life. The modern success culture has made rest suspicious. Somewhere along the way, the culture decided that a person who rests is a person who does not want it enough. That exhaustion is proof of commitment, that the dark circles and the skipped meals and the canceled relationships are badges of seriousness. Buddhism would look at this and call it exactly what it is: attachment to suffering as an identity. The belief that pain is the same thing as progress. It is not. Pain can be part of progress, but pain alone, pain for its own sake, pain as a performance, that is just destruction with better marketing. There is a quality that the Buddhist tradition honors deeply that modern culture barely mentions. It is called upekkha, equanimity, the ability to remain steady regardless of whether things are going well or falling apart. Not numb, not detached, steady. The person who celebrates a win without losing their footing. The person who faces a setback without collapsing into it. This steadiness, this middle path between elation and despair, is not emotional flatness. It is emotional intelligence at its highest level. And it is what allows a person to keep progressing when the conditions around them are anything but ideal. Here is the quiet irony of the extremes trap. The people who push hardest in the short term often produce the least in the long term. And the people who seem almost unremarkable in their daily pace, steady, consistent, never spectacular, those are frequently the people who look back after 10 years and realize they have traveled further than anyone expected. The Tortoise and the Hare is not just a children's story. It is a compressed 2,000-year-old case study in the middle path versus the trap of extremes. Think about water again. Buddhism returns to water often because water is perhaps the most perfect teacher of the middle path. Water does not attack the rock. It does not freeze itself trying to get through. It does not give up and evaporate. It simply finds the path of sustainable movement. It goes around when it must. It wears through when it can. It adapts without losing its essential nature. And given time, it reshapes the entire landscape. The rock never stood a chance, not because the water was strong, but because the water was consistent without being extreme. One of the most practically powerful things a person can take from Buddhist philosophy is the concept of cycles. Buddhism does not view time as a straight line of constant upward progress. It views time as cycles, seasons of effort and seasons of rest, seasons of expansion and seasons of consolidation. Fighting those cycles does not speed things up. It actually slows everything down because a person in constant fight with their natural rhythm is burning energy that could be going directly into their work. A craftsman in Kyoto who has been making traditional wooden bowls for 40 years was once asked the secret to his extraordinary work. His answer was so quiet it almost got lost. He said, "I never rush a single cut, and I never delay one either." He was describing the middle path without using the words. Every cut at exactly the right moment. Every pause exactly as long as needed. 40 years of that precision had produced a body of work that people traveled across the world to see. Not because he worked more than everyone else, because he worked exactly right. Progress that lasts is never linear. This is something worth accepting completely and early. There will be seasons of remarkable visible growth. There will be seasons where nothing seems to be moving at all. There will be moments of absolute clarity and momentum, and there will be stretches of fog and confusion. The middle path does not promise to eliminate those variations. What it promises is a way of moving through all of them without being destroyed by any of them. That is a promise worth more than any guarantee of constant upward momentum. Buddhism teaches that clinging is suffering, and this applies just as much to clinging to progress as to anything else. The person who clings to momentum, who falls apart the moment things slow down, is just as caught as the person who clings to their comfort zone. The middle path asks for something harder than either extreme. It asks a person to hold their growth lightly, to care deeply about the work and simultaneously not be defined by its pace. To want the result genuinely and simultaneously not needed for their peace of mind. There is a particular kind of suffering that high-achieving people rarely talk about openly.
It is the suffering of the person who is performing well by every external measure and still feels completely unsatisfied, still feels like it is not enough, still wakes up with that low, quiet anxiety that something is missing. Buddhism would diagnose this immediately. It is the suffering of someone who has been pushing one extreme, achievement, productivity, external markers of success, while completely ignoring the other side of the path, the inner life, the stillness, the rest. The middle path is not just a strategy for productivity, it is a strategy for being a whole person while pursuing something significant. Here is what becomes possible for a person who genuinely finds their middle path. Not the world's middle path, not the influencer's version of it, but their own calibrated, honest, sustainable rhythm. They stop losing months to burnout and recovery. They stop cycling through obsessive starts and complete collapses. Their output, measured across years, not weeks, becomes something extraordinary, not because they did more in any single day, but because they never stopped. They kept the string tuned. They kept the water moving. They kept showing up at the pace that a human being can actually sustain for a lifetime. And here is perhaps the most liberating thing the middle path offers a person who is serious about their growth. It gives them permission to be human in the middle of their ambition, permission to sleep, permission to enjoy something, permission to have a quiet day without it meaning they have given up. The extremes demand that a person become a machine. The middle path asks simply that a person become fully, honestly, sustainably themselves, and then trust that a person who is whole, who is not running on fumes and guilt and comparison, is exponentially more capable than a person who is impressive on paper and empty underneath. So the real question that the middle path places in front of every person serious about their growth is not how much can you take. That is the extremes question. The middle path question is far more interesting. It is, how long can you sustain? Because success does not go to the person who burns the brightest for the shortest time. It surrenders eventually and completely to the person who keeps the flame alive long enough. Not the explosion, the steady, quiet, tuned, sustainable 2,500-year-old flame of the middle path. Detach from results, obsess over the process. There is a very specific kind of pain that nobody prepares you for. It is not the pain of failure. Failure is loud and obvious, and at least it gives you something to respond to. This pain is quieter and far more confusing. It is the pain of doing everything right, putting in the work, staying consistent, following the path, and still not seeing the result you expected, still watching the numbers stay flat, still watching others move ahead, still waking up to the same circumstances despite everything you've been pouring into changing them. That pain does not come from laziness, it comes from attachment. And until a person understands what attachment actually costs them, they will keep suffering in ways they cannot fully explain.
The result is a liar. Not always, but often enough that trusting it completely is genuinely dangerous. Results arrive late. They arrive unevenly, they cluster and then disappear. They reward people who seem less deserving and ignore people who seem more so. Anyone who has worked seriously toward anything for a meaningful period of time knows this. The result is not a reliable narrator of how the story is going. It is just one data point, often delayed, often distorted, in a much longer and more complex story. And building a relationship with your own growth that depends entirely on that unreliable data point is one of the quietest ways a person dismantles themselves. Picture a master calligrapher sitting at a low wooden table. Ink, brush, paper. She has done this for decades. She does not sit down and think about how many people will see this piece. She does not calculate what it will be worth. She does not compare it to what she made last week or what someone else is producing across the city. She picks up the brush, she breathes, and she gives everything she has to this single stroke, this single moment. Not because the result does not matter, but because she has learned through years of practice that the only thing she can actually control is the quality of attention she brings to this stroke right now. Everything else is out of her hands, and she has made peace with that completely. Buddhism has a teaching that sits at the absolute center of everything it says about human suffering. It is called upadana, which translates as clinging or grasping. The Buddha taught that suffering does not come from wanting things. Wanting is natural. Wanting is human. Suffering comes from the clinging to outcomes, the white-knuckled identity-level grip on how things must turn out in order for a person to feel okay about themselves. That grip is what turns healthy ambition into quiet desperation. And quiet desperation, no matter how well it is disguised, always shows up in the work. Here's a thing that sounds almost backward until you sit with it long enough. The person who is most attached to the result usually produces the worst version of their work, because the attachment creates a kind of internal noise, a constant monitoring, a constant measuring, a constant anxiety about whether it is enough. And that noise competes directly with the focus required to do genuinely excellent work. The painter who is painting to prove something produces a different painting than the painter who has forgotten entirely about what anyone will think and is simply, completely painting. The second painting is almost always better, not because talent is different, but because presence is. There was a monk who spent 7 years carving a wooden statue of the Buddha. He worked on it every day without showing it to anyone. When it was finally complete, his students gathered to see it. They were overwhelmed. One of them asked, "Master, how did you make something so extraordinary?" The monk looked slightly confused by the question. He said, "I did not make it. I just showed up every morning and removed everything that was not it." He had spent 7 years in complete relationship with the process. The result was almost a byproduct, a beautiful, extraordinary byproduct, but still secondary to the 7 years of daily, devoted, unattached work that produced it. The Bhagavad Gita, which shares deep philosophical roots with Buddhist thought, contains what may be the most quoted and least practiced line in all of Eastern philosophy. It says, "You have the right to perform your actions, but never to the fruits of your actions." Most people read that and nod wisely. Almost no one actually lives it, because living it means doing the work fully with complete investment and genuine care, and simultaneously releasing any claim on exactly how and when and in what form the result arrives. That is not passive. That is not giving up. That is one of the most advanced things a human being can practice. Here is where it gets practically interesting. Detachment from results does not mean indifference to quality. This is the most common misreading of this principle, and it causes real damage when misunderstood. A person who is detached from results in the Buddhist sense is actually more obsessed with quality than anyone else, because quality is the one thing fully within their control. The result is not, but the care they bring to the work, the attention, the craft, the honesty, the precision, that belongs entirely to them. Detachment from results is really attachment to the process at the deepest possible level. It is not caring less, it is caring about the right things. Buddhism speaks of a quality called viraga, which means dispassion or the releasing of grip. Not the absence of passion, the releasing of the grip that passion can turn into when it gets desperate. A person with viraga works with full heart and holds the outcome lightly. They are fully invested in the journey and genuinely untroubled by the destination's timing. This sounds like a difficult balance, and it is, but the person who finds it, even imperfectly, immediately notices something shift in how their work feels. It becomes lighter, cleaner, more honest, and paradoxically, more likely to produce exactly the kind of result they wanted. Think about someone learning to ride a bicycle. At first, they grip the handlebars so tightly that their arms shake. Every wobble sends panic through their whole body, and the tighter they grip, the worse the balance gets. The moment they relax, not give up, just relax, the bike begins to find its own stability. The skill does not disappear, the effort does not disappear, but the desperate clinging releases, and in that release, something that was not working suddenly works. Growth operates on an almost identical principle. The grip that is meant to hold things together is often the very thing keeping everything from flowing. There is a concept in Zen called mushin, a mind without attachment to outcome, without ego interference, without the weight of result. It is sometimes translated as no mind, but that is slightly misleading.
It does not mean empty, it means free. A mind in Mushin is fully engaged, fully present, fully capable, and completely unencumbered by the anxiety of outcome. Zen archers train for years specifically to access this state before they release the arrow, because an arrow released from Mushin flies differently than an arrow released from calculation and desperation. Every serious practitioner of any craft knows this feeling, the moments when something extraordinary came through them, not from them. Those moments are Mushin, and they become more accessible the more a person learns to release their grip on results. Here is an observation that is almost too simple to take seriously until the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. The projects a person does purely for the love of doing them, with no audience in mind, no metric tracking, no external pressure, those projects are often their best work. The blog nobody read that turned out to be beautifully written, the song made in a bedroom that carried more honesty than the one made for a label, the painting done for nobody that said everything. When the result is removed from the equation entirely, something authentic moves in to fill that space. Call it creativity, call it presence, call it the process finally allowed to breathe. Whatever it is, it produces something that outcome-focused work rarely does. Buddhism teaches that everything is impermanent, anicca. Every result, every achievement, every measure of success is a temporary condition. It will change. It will pass. It will be replaced by something new. Understanding this deeply does not create hopelessness, it creates freedom. Because if every result is temporary, then no single result defines you. And if no single result defines you, then the only thing worth genuine investment is the quality of how you move through each day. The only thing that actually accumulates across all the changing results, across all the seasons of success and difficulty, is the depth of the practice, the process, the daily commitment. That is the only thing impermanence cannot touch. There is a Japanese aesthetic concept called wabi-sabi, the appreciation of beauty in imperfection and impermanence. It is why a Japanese tea bowl with a small crack is considered more beautiful than a perfect one. The crack tells the story of the process, the history, the real life of the object. A person obsessed with results wants the perfect bowl. A person in relationship with the process understands that the crack is not a failure. It is information. It is character. It is proof that something real happened here. Wabi-sabi applied to a human life means the imperfect, messy, uneven process of your growth is not something to be embarrassed about. It is the most honest and beautiful part of the whole story. Here's something worth saying plainly, because it almost never gets said. The result, when it finally arrives, rarely feels the way a person imagined it would. Most people who achieve a significant goal report a strange flatness in the moment of arrival, a brief satisfaction followed almost immediately by, "Now what?" This is not ingratitude. This is the completely predictable consequence of having built an entire emotional architecture around a single external outcome. The person whose identity was tied to the result now has the result and discovers that their identity feels no more complete than it did before. Buddhism anticipated this experience thousands of years ago. It is called the hedonic treadmill in modern psychology. Buddhism simply calls it the natural result of misplaced attachment. The process, on the other hand, does not disappoint in the same way, because the process is always available. It is happening right now. A person in genuine relationship with their process, who finds meaning in the daily work itself, is never waiting for arrival. They are already somewhere worth being. Every day of honest work is complete in itself. Every session of genuine effort is its own small destination. This is not a consolation prize for people who have not achieved results. This is actually the more sophisticated relationship with growth, the one that produces both better results and a richer life along the way. Buddhism offers a practice called satipatthana, the foundation of mindfulness, which at its core is about bringing full, clear, non-grasping attention to whatever is happening right now. Not what happened yesterday, not what might happen next week, not what the result will look like when it arrives. What is happening in this moment of work, this breath, this word, this brushstroke, this conversation, this choice. Practiced consistently, Satipatthana turns even the most ordinary process into something sacred, not because the task is dramatic, but because the quality of attention transforms whatever it touches. A sculptor was once asked, "Do you get tired of the same process every day? The chiseling, the measuring, the slow removal of stone?" He laughed and said, "I have never done the same thing twice. Every stone is different. Every day I am different. The process looks the same from the outside, but from the inside it is always new." He had been working for 30 years, and he still spoke about his daily practice with the enthusiasm of someone who discovered it last week. That is what a genuine relationship with process does. It keeps a person permanently, quietly, sustainably alive to their own work. No result could ever provide that for 30 consecutive years. Only the process can sustain that kind of engagement. There's a line in the Zen tradition that deserves to be carried for a while. It says, "The obstacle is the path." Not something to be overcome on the way to the path, not something unfortunate that showed up near the path. The obstacle itself is the path. This reframes everything. Every difficulty in the process, every slow period, every failed attempt, every plateau, every confusing stretch is not an interruption of growth, it is growth. The person who understands this does not just tolerate the hard parts of the process, they begin to recognize them as the most valuable parts, because they are the parts doing the most important work. And so here is the quiet truth that this entire part has been building toward. Detaching from results is not giving up on success, it is the most direct path to it. Because the person who releases the desperate grip on outcome, who shows up for the process with full presence and genuine care, that person builds something that attachment never could. They build mastery, real mastery. The kind that does not depend on recognition to exist, does not require a metric to validate it, and does not collapse the moment conditions become difficult. They become, in the truest sense, unstoppable. Not because the results always go their way, but because their relationship with the work itself has become independent of results entirely. And a person like that, a person that free, that present, that devoted to the process, success does not just find eventually, it has absolutely no choice. Nobody chooses pain. Nobody wakes up and thinks, "Today I would like to be broken open. Today I would like to lose something that mattered. Today I would like to sit with a kind of hurt that does not have a name yet." Pain arrives uninvited, unscheduled, and almost always at the worst possible time. And the first instinct, the deeply human, completely understandable instinct, is to get away from it as fast as possible. To fix it, numb it, outrun it, or at the very minimum to make it mean nothing. But here's the thing about pain that nobody tells you when you are inside it. The people who eventually build something extraordinary, the ones who grow in ways that genuinely change the direction of their lives, almost none of them got there despite their pain. They got there through it. Pain that is avoided becomes a ceiling. Pain that is understood becomes a door. This is not a motivational slogan. This is an observation about how human beings actually work, recorded across thousands of years of Buddhist practice, study, and honest witnessing of the human condition. The person who spends their life running from discomfort gradually shrinks. Their world gets smaller. Their risks get fewer. Their growth slows to almost nothing. Not because they are weak, but because they have made comfort the highest priority. And comfort, unchallenged, is one of the quietest enemies of a meaningful life. Imagine a piece of iron ore sitting inside a mountain, perfectly safe, perfectly undisturbed, going absolutely nowhere. Now imagine that same iron ore subjected to extraordinary heat, pressed, shaped, hammered, refined. What comes out the other side is something entirely different, something harder, sharper, more useful, and infinitely more valuable than what went in. The ore did not enjoy the furnace, but the furnace was not its destruction, it was its transformation. Buddhism has understood this about human beings for centuries. The question was never whether a person would face fire. The question was always, what would they allow the fire to make them? The very first teaching the Buddha gave after his enlightenment was not about peace. It was not about joy. It was not about transcendence. It was about suffering. He called it dukkha, a word that gets translated as suffering but carries a richer meaning than that single word suggests. Dukkha describes the fundamental unsatisfactoriness of life when lived without wisdom, the friction, the disappointment, the gap between what is and what we want. The Buddha did not begin with comfort because he understood something that took him years of his own pain to learn. A person cannot find their way out of suffering by pretending it is not there. The path through always begins with looking directly at what is actually happening. Here is what the Four Noble Truths, the very foundation of Buddhist teaching, actually say when you strip away every layer of religious language and read them plainly. 1. Life contains suffering. 2. Suffering has a cause. 3. The cause can be understood and addressed. 4. There is a path that leads through it. What the Buddha was essentially doing with these four statements was handing every human being a framework for transforming their pain into something navigable. He was not saying ignore it. He was not saying enjoy it. He was saying look at it clearly, understand where it is coming from, and then move through it with wisdom. That is not a religious instruction. That is a profoundly practical one. There was a woman in a small village who lost everything in a single year: her husband, her home, her sense of who she was and where she belonged. She walked for days until she found a monastery and collapsed at the gate. The monk who opened the door did not offer her philosophy. He brought her tea, a place to rest, and silence. After several days, when she was ready, she asked him, "Why did this happen to me?" He sat with her question for a long time before answering, and when he did, he said, "I do not know why it happened, but I know that the depth of your breaking is the exact measure of the depth you are now capable of." She did not understand him then. She understood him years later, when the life she built from the rubble of that worst year turned out to be the truest version of herself she had ever lived.
Buddhism introduces a concept that Tibetan practitioners call poison into medicine. The idea is radical and slightly uncomfortable when first encountered. It suggests that the very thing causing the most pain, the loss, the failure, the betrayal, the illness, the grief, contains within it the precise ingredient needed for the next level of a person's development. Not in a way that justifies the pain or makes it acceptable, but in the sense that pain, properly met and honestly processed, produces qualities that nothing comfortable ever could. Patience, born from wading through something difficult. Compassion, born from having suffered yourself. Clarity, born from having had everything you thought mattered stripped away. Here is a truth that people who have been through significant difficulty often recognize, but rarely say out loud because it sounds strange. The version of them that exists on the other side of a serious, honest encounter with pain is someone they respect more than the version that existed before. Not because the pain was good, but because meeting it, actually meeting it instead of escaping it, required them to find something inside themselves they did not know was there. And once a person has found that, once they know what they are made of when things become genuinely hard, they carry that knowledge forward into everything. It changes their relationship with risk, with difficulty, with uncertainty, because they know now from personal evidence that they can survive and grow through things that would have broken the earlier version of them completely. The Buddhist practice of Tonglen is one of the most psychologically sophisticated practices in any spiritual tradition anywhere in the world. It asks a person to do something that is almost the opposite of every instinct they have. Instead of breathing in fresh air and breathing out the pain, which is what most of us do instinctively, Tonglen asks a person to breathe in the pain, to take it in willingly, consciously, fully, and then breathe out relief, compassion, and spaciousness, not just for themselves, but for every person anywhere in the world experiencing the same thing. The practice works because it transforms isolation into connection. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" it becomes, "This is a human experience, and I am meeting it on behalf of everyone who faces it." That shift does not make the pain disappear, but it makes the pain purposeful. And purposeful pain is an entirely different experience from pointless suffering. The difference between suffering and growth is not the presence or absence of pain. It is the relationship a person has with their pain. A person who relates to their pain as evidence of unworthiness, as proof that something is fundamentally wrong with them, as a sign that the universe has specifically targeted them, that person suffers in a way that compounds. The pain becomes a story. The story becomes an identity. The identity becomes a cage. But a person who relates to their pain as information, as feedback, as a teacher, as something that is pointing at something important, that person moves through the same experience and comes out with something the other person does not have: direction, depth, and a quality of understanding that only experience can produce. Buddhism speaks of a quality called dukkha gnana, the wisdom born from suffering. It is listed as one of the deepest and most reliable forms of insight available to a human being. Not wisdom learned from books, not wisdom inherited from a teacher, wisdom that was bought at the price of personal difficulty and extracted through honest reflection. This kind of wisdom has a particular texture that other people can feel. When someone who has genuinely been through something speaks about it, not performing their pain, not using it for sympathy, but speaking from the actual earned understanding of having lived through it, something in the listener recognizes it as real, because it is real in a way that borrowed wisdom never quite manages to be. There is a particular kind of person worth paying close attention to. They are often the ones who do not talk much about their difficult past. They carry it quietly. But when you spend time with them, when you work alongside them or face something hard in their presence, you notice something. They do not panic the way others do. They do not crumble at uncertainty. They have a steadiness that is not performance. It is not bravado. It is something quieter and more durable than either of those things. When you eventually learn what they have been through, what they survived, what they lost, what they rebuilt from, the steadiness makes complete sense. They were not born with it. They earned it inside the exact experiences that looked, from the outside, like the worst things that ever happened to them. Buddhism does not romanticize suffering. This is an important distinction. There is a version of spiritual thinking that slides into what might be called pain worship, the idea that suffering is always noble, that difficulty is always meaningful, that the harder something is, the more spiritually valuable it must be. Buddhism rejects this firmly. Suffering is not the goal. The goal is liberation from unnecessary suffering. But the path to that liberation runs directly through an honest, clear-eyed encounter with the suffering that is real and present. Not around it, not above it, not through some mental trick that makes it seem like it was never there. Through it, with eyes open, with the willingness to learn what it is genuinely trying to teach. There is a Zen story of a student who came to his teacher weeping. He said, "Master, I have failed again. I have worked so hard and I have failed, and I do not know if I have what it takes to continue." The teacher looked at him without sympathy and without dismissal. He said simply, "How many times have you fallen?" The student thought and said, "Many times, too many to count." The teacher nodded slowly and said, "And how many times have you gotten back up?" The student paused. He said, "Every time." The teacher said, "Then you have not failed. You have been training. The falls were the training." The student had been measuring himself by the falls and completely overlooking the evidence of who he actually was, someone who had gotten back up every single time. That is not a failure. That is a person being forged. Here's what pain does to purpose when a person is willing to sit with it long enough to extract the lesson. It narrows things down. It removes what is superficial. It burns away the goals that were borrowed from someone else and leaves behind only what is genuinely personally true for that individual. Many people spend years pursuing things they thought they wanted, chasing versions of success shaped by other people's expectations, until a significant difficulty arrives and strips all of that away. And in the stripping, something emerges that was always there but never had space to be seen. The real thing, the genuine direction, the actual purpose. Pain in this sense is not the enemy of purpose. It is frequently its clearest revealer. Buddhism teaches that the lotus flower, which appears throughout Buddhist art and symbolism, grows only in muddy water. It does not grow in clear, clean, comfortable ponds. It grows in the mud. The mud is not incidental to the lotus. The mud is literally what the lotus transforms into beauty. It is the raw material of the flower. And a lotus that had been removed from the mud to protect it, placed in clean water, given perfect conditions, shielded from everything uncomfortable, would not bloom. The lotus needs the mud, not because the mud is pleasant, but because transformation requires material, and mud is what the lotus was built to transform. The people in history who built things that lasted, who created, discovered, taught, led, or made something that the world genuinely needed, almost all of them have a period of significant difficulty somewhere in their story, not as a footnote, usually as a turning point. The difficulty was the moment when the path narrowed, the options disappeared, and they were left with nothing except the truest version of who they were. Some people collapse at that moment. Others discover, in the collapsing, that they are not actually finished, that there is something in them that will not submit. And whatever that thing is, that refusal, that quiet, stubborn core that remains when everything else has been stripped away, that is the seed of every significant thing they build afterward. Buddhism offers a practice called pratitya samutpada, dependent origination. The understanding that nothing arises in isolation. Every condition depends on other conditions, including growth, including purpose, including the particular kind of depth that makes a person genuinely valuable to others and to themselves. That depth does not arise from comfort. It arises from the full spectrum of human experience, including and especially the parts that hurt. A person who has only ever experienced smooth conditions is a person who has only ever developed in response to smooth conditions, and smooth conditions do not develop everything a person has. Only the full range does that.
There is something that the people on the other side of genuine difficulty often say when they are honest about the experience. They say, "I would not wish it on anyone, and I would not trade it for anything." That paradox is not confusion. It is the most accurate description available of what it means to have been through something genuinely hard and to have allowed it to do its work. The pain was real, and they would not inflict it on someone they loved, but the person it made them, the depth, the clarity, the compassion, the unshakable understanding of what actually matters, that they would not give back for any version of the easier life they might have had instead. And so the invitation here, the Buddhist invitation, extended not from a place of spiritual distance, but from a place of deep, honest witness, is simply this. Whatever pain you are currently carrying, whatever difficulty you are in the middle of right now, or have recently come through, or are quietly dreading, do not only ask how to escape it, ask also what it is trying to build in you. Ask what it is pointing at. Ask what version of you is being carved out of this particular stone right now. Because the question is not whether the fire is happening. The question is what kind of iron you are choosing to become inside it. And the answer to that question, the honest, courageous Buddhist answer, will determine everything that comes next. The day success surrenders to your dedication. There is a moment that almost nobody talks about. not because it is rare, but because it is so quiet that most people miss it entirely when it happens. It is not the moment of the big win. It is not the viral post or the sold-out event or the number that finally crossed the threshold. It is a much smaller moment than any of those. It is the morning a person wakes up and realizes, without fanfare, without announcement, without anyone else present, that they are no longer the same person who started. Something has shifted, something permanent, and the life they once only imagined living has somehow, without a single dramatic turning point, become the life they are actually inside. That morning is the day success surrendered, and almost no one saw it coming, including the person it happened to. Success is not an event. This is perhaps the most important sentence in this entire series, and it deserves to be said plainly and without decoration. The world sells success as an event, a launch, an achievement, a moment of arrival that changes everything in an instant. And because people are waiting for that event, they completely miss the actual process by which real, lasting success is built. It is not built in events. It is built in the accumulation of unremarkable days lived with remarkable consistency. It is built in the decisions nobody saw, the work nobody applauded, the mornings a person showed up when every reasonable excuse to stay in bed was fully available to them. There is an old Buddhist parable about a man who searched his entire life for a great treasure. He traveled to distant mountains. He consulted wise teachers. He endured hardships that would have broken most people. And at the very end of his life, exhausted and humbled, he returned home, only to discover that the treasure had been buried in his own garden the entire time. The story is not about wasted effort. It is about direction. He needed the journey. The journey made him someone capable of recognizing and using what was already his. But the thing he sought was never somewhere else. It was always here, always waiting for him to become the person who could finally see it. Buddhism has a concept called parami, the perfections. These are qualities that a person cultivates not over weeks or months, but over an entire lifetime of devoted practice. Generosity, virtue, patience, energy, wisdom, equanimity. None of these qualities can be rushed. None of them can be faked sustainably. They are built the way coral reefs are built, invisibly, slowly, through the accumulation of countless small deposits over time. And just like a coral reef, once they are built, they create an entire ecosystem around them. They change the environment. They attract abundance. They become a foundation that supports far more life than the person who built them ever expected.
Here's the thing about dedication that the modern world fundamentally misunderstands. Dedication is not intensity. Intensity is available to almost everyone for short periods. Dedication is something else entirely. Dedication is the quality that remains after the intensity has faded, after the excitement of the new beginning has worn off, after the novelty has been replaced by routine, after the people who started alongside you have quietly moved on to something else. Dedication is what shows up on the Tuesday afternoon when there is no particular reason to continue except the quiet internal commitment to the thing itself. And that Tuesday afternoon, repeated enough times, is exactly where success is built. The Buddha spent 45 years after his enlightenment simply walking from village to village and teaching. No empire, no monument, no dramatic conquest, just the daily, devoted, patient offering of wisdom to whoever was ready to receive it, for 45 years. He did not do it for legacy. He did not do it for influence. He did it because it was the work, and the work was worth doing fully for its own sake. And the legacy that emerged from those 45 years of quiet dedication, the tradition that spread across the entire world and shaped the lives of hundreds of millions of people, that was never the goal. That was just what happened when someone showed up completely for long enough. Think about the concept of compound interest applied not to money, but to human growth. Every day a person practices their craft. They do not just add to what they know, they multiply it. Skills connect to other skills. Understanding deepens existing understanding. Discipline in one area bleeds into every other area. The person who has been quietly, consistently working on themselves for 5 years does not have 5 years of growth. They have something closer to 50 years of growth, because everything they learned compounded against everything else they learned. This is why people who have been at something for a long time seem so far ahead. It is not that they worked more hours, it is that compound growth is not linear, and the only way to access it is to stay in the game long enough for it to begin working in your favor. There is a Tibetan teaching that says the way to move a mountain is not to push it. The way to move a mountain is to become the kind of person capable of moving a mountain. And that becoming, that deep, patient internal transformation takes exactly as long as it takes, not a day less. Because the mountain does not move for the person who is merely trying hard. The mountain moves for the person who has become someone it cannot ignore. That is not mysticism. That is the simple, observable truth of what sustained dedication does to a human being over time. It builds a kind of person that circumstances cannot hold back indefinitely. Success, eventually, simply runs out of reasons to stay away. Buddhism teaches a principle called citta bhavana, the cultivation of mind. Not the achievement of mind, the cultivation. Like a garden. A garden does not produce its best harvest the first season. It requires preparation, planting, tending, pruning, patience through drought and frost, and the willingness to show up for it even in the seasons when nothing visible is growing. A mind cultivated over time, through meditation, through honest reflection, through continuous learning and genuine practice, becomes something extraordinary. Not suddenly, gradually. And the harvest of a well-cultivated mind is not just success in any single area, it is the capacity to create value, solve problems, and generate growth in every area of life simultaneously. Here is what nobody tells the person at the beginning of their journey. The early days are the most important and the most thankless. The early days are when the habits are being formed, when the identity is being constructed, when the neural pathways are being carved. Nothing is visible yet. The results are nowhere in sight, and the only thing sustaining the effort is the decision, made fresh every single morning, to continue. Those early days are where most people stop, and the tragic irony is that stopping in those early days before anything is visible is stopping just as the most important underground work is being completed. The bamboo is 4 years in, 1 more year of watering, and it shoots up 90 feet. But the person who stops at year 4 will never know that. They will only know that they planted a seed and nothing came of it. And they will be wrong.
There was a calligrapher in ancient China who wrote the same character every day for 30 years. Just one character. His students found this bizarre, even slightly obsessive. After 30 years, he wrote the character one final time, set down his brush, and said, "Now it is correct." His students looked at 30 years of the same character and asked, "Was it not correct before?" He said, "It was improving before. Now it is correct." He had spent 30 years in devoted relationship with a single pursuit, and what he achieved in 30 years of that relationship was something that 30 years of scattered effort toward many different things could never have produced. Mastery is always the product of unreasonable dedication to a single direction for an unreasonable amount of time. Buddhism speaks of a state called nibbana, liberation. Most people understand this as a religious concept about the afterlife or spiritual transcendence, but in practical terms, nibbana describes something very immediate and very real. It is the liberation that comes from releasing the things that bind a person, the fear, the comparison, the need for approval, the anxiety about outcomes, the exhausting performance of a life lived for external validation. When a person releases those bindings through consistent practice and honest inner work, they do not disappear from the world. They become more present in it, more effective, more genuinely themselves. And from that place of authentic liberation, everything they create carries a quality of integrity and purpose that people can feel without being able to explain why.
The world is full of people who are talented and going nowhere. It is full of intelligent people who are stuck. It is full of capable people who are frustrated. And it is not because talent, intelligence, and capability are useless. It is because talent without dedication is a seed that never gets watered. Intelligence without direction is a powerful engine with no road. Capability without consistency is a fire that burns bright for an hour and then goes cold. The single variable that converts all of those raw materials into actual, lasting, undeniable results, the one ingredient that changes the entire equation, is the willingness to show up again and again and again without needing the result to be visible before the effort is given. Here is the most honest thing that can be said about the relationship between dedication and success. Success does not always arrive on schedule. It does not always arrive in the form expected. It does not always announce itself the way a person imagined it would. But for the person who is genuinely, sustainably, honestly dedicated to their growth, success arrives. It always arrives, because dedication changes a person into someone success cannot reasonably avoid. The river that keeps flowing does not worry about whether the rock will eventually give way. The river simply flows. And the rock, without exception, without fail, in every recorded instance in the history of water, eventually does. Buddhism teaches that a person's actions leave traces called karma, not in the supernatural sense that most people imagine, but in the completely observable sense that every action shapes the next condition. Every day of honest work creates conditions that make the next day of honest work slightly more possible. Every instance of choosing growth over comfort creates a slightly stronger version of the person making the choice. Every morning of showing up, even when nothing seems to be moving, lays down another layer of the foundation. Karma, understood this way, is simply the truth that nothing is wasted. Every seed planted leaves a trace, and the field of a person who has been planting consistently for years, even when no harvest was visible, is quietly and inevitably becoming the most fertile ground in the area. There is a quality that the people who eventually achieve something genuinely significant all seem to share. Not talent, not genius, not even vision, though those things have their place. The quality they share is what might be called a long relationship with their own potential. They believed in what they were building before there was any evidence to justify that belief. They kept the relationship alive through the dry seasons. They returned to the work even after doubt had visited and stayed for a while. They treated their potential not as a fixed quantity they either had or did not have, but as a living thing that grew in direct proportion to the care they gave it. And over time, that care compounded into something the world eventually had no choice but to recognize. Buddhism does not promise that dedication will be easy. It does not promise that the path will be straight. It does not promise that every day of honest work will feel meaningful, or that every season of growth will be visible, or that the timing of success will align with what a person planned or deserved or desperately needed. What Buddhism does promise, quietly, consistently, across 2,500 years of human observation, is this. The person who cultivates themselves with genuine dedication, who releases attachment to how and when the result arrives, who shows up with right effort and clear mind and patient heart, that person becomes someone that life itself tends toward. Not through magic, through the simple, unstoppable logic of what consistent growth does to a human being over time. This entire journey, from the seed that refused to stop growing, through the daily practice, past the silenced ego, along the middle path, through detachment and darkness and the turning of pain into purpose, all of it has been pointing at a single truth. A truth so simple that it almost sounds too small for all the words that have surrounded it. The truth is this: the only person you are ever truly competing with is the person you were yesterday. And the only measure of success that will ever genuinely satisfy you is the honest answer to the question, did I grow today? Not did I win today? Not did anyone notice today? Not did the result arrive today? Simply, did I grow? Because a person who grows every day, imperfectly, quietly, without needing an audience, is a person that success is already chasing. They just have not looked back yet to see how close behind it is. If this series has planted something in you, a question, a shift, a quiet recognition of something you already knew but had not yet said clearly to yourself, then it has done exactly what it was meant to do. Wisdom is not information that fills a person up. Wisdom is the thing that empties a person of what was not serving them and makes space for what actually will. And if even one idea from this journey does that for even one person, then every word was worth writing, and every moment you spent here was worth your time. If this video spoke to something real in you, if it said something you needed to hear or reminded you of something you had forgotten, do something small that carries enormous weight. Like this video so that others who need it can find it. Share it with someone who is in the middle of their own underground season, someone still in year 4, still watering, still unseen, still going. Leave a comment below and tell this community where you are in your journey, because your words matter here. This channel, Wisdom Woven, exists for exactly this, for the people who are serious about their growth, for the people who are willing to do the quiet work, for the people who understand, somewhere underneath all the noise of the modern world, that the ancient wisdom still applies, that it has always applied, and that it will keep applying long after every trend has come and gone. Subscribe so that this conversation continues, because this was not an ending. This was simply the day the next seed was planted. And somewhere, in a monastery on a mountain, in a garden before sunrise, in a quiet room where a person sits with nothing but their breath and their commitment, the work continues, as it always has, as it always will, drop by drop, day by day, without asking permission, without waiting for applause, without needing success to confirm what dedication already knows. The seed that refuses to stop growing does not need the world to believe in it. It only needs the one person tending it to refuse one more time, and then one more time after that, to walk away.